In a vitriolic and deeply personal tirade that signifies a new level of defiant confidence within the Kremlin, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has launched a scathing verbal assault against United States President Donald Trump and prominent Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. The blistering attack, delivered through a series of lengthy posts on his widely followed social media channels, dismissed American ultimatums as pathetic bluffs and advised Washington's leadership to focus on their own nation's spiraling internal problems rather than attempting to dictate terms to a resurgent Russia. Medvedev's outburst is far more than the typical diplomatic sparring. It is a declaration of contempt, fueled by Russia's recent battlefield successes at Pokrovsk and the crucial economic backing from China and India. This calculated invective is clearly designed to mock the Trump administration's foreign policy, projects and image of unshakable Russian strength, and further galvanize domestic support for the war in Ukraine by portraying the conflict as a righteous struggle against an arrogant and decaying American empire. Medvedev, who currently serves as the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, has carved out a unique role as the Kremlin's most aggressive and unfiltered public voice. While official government spokespeople often employ more measured language, Medvedev's social media presence is a firestorm of nationalist fervor, historical grievance, and crude insult aimed at Russia's perceived enemies. His latest broadside took direct aim at President Trump's shortened 10-day deadline for a ceasefire, which he characterized as the desperate whimpering of a politically weakened showman whose threat no longer carried any weight on the world stage. He ridiculed the very idea of the ultimatum, framing it as an embarrassing spectacle that revealed American impotence rather than strength. He suggests that President Trump was more concerned with creating dramatic headlines for his domestic political base than with engaging in serious diplomacy. In one particularly venomous passage, Medvedev addressed President Trump directly, though with dripping sarcasm. He questioned who had given the United States the authority to issue deadline to a major nuclear power. He pointed to the recent unified front presented by China and India as the definitive proof that the world was no longer willing to bow to American economic pressure. He argued that the era of the unipolar world, where Washington could bully other nations into submission, was over for good. He wrote that while Russia had noted the tickling clock, it was a clock that told time only in a fantasy world inhabited by American politicians who still believe in their own exceptionalism. The reality, Medvedev asserted, was being written on the battlefields of the Donbas, where he claimed the brave Russian army was systematically dismantling the NATO train and supply puppet regime in Kyiv. He gloated openly about the fall of Pokrovsk, describing the chaotic flight of Ukrainian soldiers as a direct and humiliating answer to President Trump's pompous demand. The core of Medvedev's message was a sharp and sustained command for the American leadership to look in the mirror and clean up your own filthy house before lecturing others. He painted a grim picture of the United States as a nation in terminal decline, beset by intractable problems. He wrote of cities ravaged by crime and homelessness, a political system paralyzed by bitter and irreconcilable divisions, and an economy groaning under the weight of national debt. He sneeringly advised President Trump to focus his energies on what he termed the uncontrolled invasion at the U.S. southern border, a clear reference to the portfolio of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, suggesting that American leaders were incapable of securing their own country, let alone policing the rest of the world. This line of attack is a classic Kremlin tactics designed to undermine the moral authority of the United States and to portray its foreign policy interventions as hypocritical attempts to distract from domestic failure. Medvedev then turned his focus to Senator Lindsey Graham, a longtime Russia hawk who has consistently advocated for a more aggressive posture against Moscow. In response to recent, albeit unspecified comments from the senator likely calling for even tougher measure following the Pokrovsk collapse, Medvedev unleashed a torrent of personal abuse. He branded Senator Graham a senile warmonger and an old fool who was trapped in a Cold War mindset. He accused the senator of being a mouthpiece for the American military-industrial complex, suggesting that figures like Graham personally profited from perpetual conflict and had a vested interest in prolonging the war in Ukraine to sell more weapons. He described the senator's call for a strategic defeat of Russia as the delusional rambling of a man who failed to understand the new geopolitical reality. Medvedev warned that such rhetoric was not only pointless but also dangerous, as it pushed the world closer to a direct confrontation between nuclear powers. He concluded his diatribe against the senator by stating that the Grahams of this world and their bloodthirsty fantasies would be relegated to the dustbin of history by a new global order led by sovereign nations like Russia. The official Kremlin response to Medvedev's outburst was, as is often the case, more restrained but implicitly supportive. When asked by journalists to comment on the harsh language used by the former president, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov gave a carefully calibrated answer. Dmitry Anatolovich is expressing his personal opinion, as he often does, with his characteristic style. Peskov stated, however, it is fair to say that his words reflect a sentiment that is very, very widely shared throughout Russian society. There is a deep frustration with the West's confrontational approach and its refusal to acknowledge Russia's legitimate security interests. While the official position of the Russian government is always one of readiness for serious, substantive dialogue, such as dialogue cannot happen under the threat of ultimatums and public dictations. This statement effectively provides official cover for Medvedev's attack, allowing the Kremlin to distance itself from the most undiplomatic language while simultaneously endorsing the underlying message of defiance. The incendiary comments from Moscow have elicited a sharp response in Washington, forcing the Trump administration to react to a direct and personal challenge to its authority. President Trump, who is famously sensitive to personal insult and challenge to his strength, fired back on his social media platform. He dismissed Medvedev as a second-rate official and a puppet of President Vladimir Putin. I see Putin's little helper is talking again, the president wrote. Nobody in Washington listened to this guy. He was a terrible president, a real lightweight, and now he's trying to act tough. Sad. The fact is, Russia is getting hammered economically, and they are scared of what's coming. That's why they are squealing. They know our deadline is real. They see our resolve. We are the one who will bring peace through strength, not through weak words from has-beens. President Trump's response was characteristic of his personal style, turning a geopolitical confrontation into a battle of personality and seeking to project an image of unflappable confidence. The State Department, under the leadership of Secretary Marco Rubio, offered a more formal and diplomatic yet equally firm condemnation of Medvedev's rhetoric. Secretary Rubio called the comments reckless, irresponsible, and completely counterproductive to any effort to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. The language used by Mr. Medvedev is not the language of a serious statement. It is the language of a propagandist trying to incite hatred, Rubio said at a hastily arranged press briefing. It is a clear attempt to distract from the reality of Russia's brutal and unprovoked aggression against its sovereign neighbor. Instead of engaging in juvenile assault, we urge the leadership in Moscow to take seriously the opportunity for a ceasefire presented by President Trump. The world is watching, and history will judge harshly those who choose escalation and vitriol over diplomacy and peace. The United States will not be baited or deterred by such crude tactic. Our policy is clear, our resolve is firm, and our deadline is approaching. Other figures in Washington also weigh in. Senator Graham responded to Medvedev's attack with defiance, stating that he considered the insult a badge of honor. When thuggish crony of a war criminal dictator like Putin attacks you, it means you're doing something right, Graham said in a statement. Mr. Medvedev's hysterical rant is the sound of a failing regime that knows its time is running out. It only strengthened my resolve to ensure that the United States leads the free world in holding Putin's and his henchmen accountable for their crimes. We must designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism and ensure that the Ukrainian people have everything they need to win this fight for their freedom. The exchange highlights the deep ideological chasm between Moscow and Washington, with each side using the other's words to reinforce its own narrative and justify its own policies. The international community has watched this escalating war of words with growing alarm. European allies, while publicly supportive of the American position, have privately expressed concerns that the increasingly personal and inflammatory rhetoric is making a diplomatic off-ramp more difficult to find. There is a fear that both sides are backing themselves into corners from which it will be difficult to retreat without losing face. Meanwhile, China and India, the two nations that have provided Russia with its crucial economic shield, have remained conspicuously silent on Medvedev's comment. Their silence is widely interpreted as a tacit acceptance of Russia's defiant posture, so long as it does not directly implicate them in the verbal sparring. Their primary interest remains economic stability and the continuation of their beneficial trade with Moscow, and they see little to gain by inserting themselves into a rhetorical slugging match between Russia and the United States. Ultimately, Dmitry Medvedev's verbal assault served as a powerful symbol of the current moment. It is the voice of Russia that feels emboldened by its military gains, secure in its new economic partnership, and early contemptuous of American leadership. The attack is a calculated act of psychological warfare, intended to sow doubt, project strength, and cement a narrative of American decline. As President Trump's deadline ticks closer, this war of words has become just as intense as the war on the ground. It has raised the stakes for the president, who must now decide how to respond when his ultimatum is met, not with compliance, but with mockery and open defiance. The world now waits to see if strength, as President Trump defines it, will manifest as a devastating economic blow, or if the defiant words from Moscow will expose the limits of American power in a newly fractured and contentious world. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, and so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to World Global Conflict, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, your first ones on me. But if you have watched the show before, it's like you are freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.